All right, so I'm not terribly enthused about that decision in Pitbull versus Roach. I think Roach won that fight. I picked Pitbull. Pitbull did a really good job. The fight went the way that I expected it to in the first few rounds. I think Pitbull dominated the first few rounds, but he was unable to land that really big shot to stagger or hurt Roach. And Roach was throwing very effective and big counter punches, bigger counter punches back than Cruz was giving him. And I think it was clear from maybe round six, round five onward, whenever Lamont Roach started to clinch and really outbox and get on his bike. Well, he sort of went from a middle round. The fight flowed like this. Cruz attacked at the beginning, initiated inside fighting. Then in round five and six, Roach started to clinch. And it's funny because then Cruz started initiating clinches too, which, it's part of the reason why you do that against an inside fighter. And it's one of the ways in which I think Roach clearly won this fight, especially on the flow of the fight, because the fight was clearly being determined by him. He was clearly determining where the fight was taking place, at least from round five onward when he started clinching, because the clinching turned into him getting on his bike and moving. Once he started clinching, he then uninitiated the clinching by outboxing. And the American style of boxing is a beautiful thing. That was a thought that I had during this fight, during those middle rounds, when it really felt like Lamont Roach had suckered Pitbull Cruz in to this inside game, then actually gotten in a lot of trouble, but it was worth it. He downloaded information. He learned how to counterpunch. He had to take some damage over the first four rounds, but the clinching, it minimizes the damage. It allows Lamont Roach to do his own work on the inside. It allows Lamont Roach to determine the pace of the fight. And then once he starts outboxing, it's already round six or round seven, and you can see that Pitbull Cruz is tired and Pitbull Cruz is frustrated. And the thing that was most impressive about this fight, and unfortunately, you don't really score points for making somebody miss in an impressive fashion in the way that Roach did, where he was making, Cruz audibly whiff at air. There was one moment in this fight, I think it was round seven or eight, where they both whiffed. It was like a simultaneous whiff. You could hear two whooshes of air. They both flung these huge hooks at each other and both slipped at the same time. Neither of the punches hit. But these guys were really throwing at times in this fight. There were a lot of power shots, at least thrown in this fight. Uh, a lot of very big, aggressive body punching, a lot of big, aggressive hooks. Not a lot of straights in this fight now that I think about it. There was a lot of jabbing and a lot of hooks. Um, Roach won the jab battle, but that's not surprising. But he made it his fight. And the problem is he wasn't scoring that much. And people will be frustrated that I'm saying that, but he wasn't scoring that much because he's too natural of a counterpuncher, I think. And what I mean by that is that he really only throws those shots at the right time, and he tends towards single shots too much in a sport based and built on accumulative damage. And he needs to follow up on some of those initial shots that he throws, because a lot of those shots that he was hitting Pitbull with, those counter punches off the back foot, were extremely strong and extremely effective, and seemed like they hurt Pitbull. And there was an opportunity in the later rounds. I think Pitbull kept boxing and kept cycling. Actually, he was sort of trying to engage Roach in his own game and not move forward all the time, Cruz, which is, you would expect Cruz to just move forward all the time. But he had opportunities to move forward, and he didn't do that. And I think it's because at some point in this fight, I can't identify exactly where, but he got hit with a big shot that scared him. And you could see that, from round eight, at least until round 12, but even in round 12, he didn't really try to trade in the middle. He was just scared of committing too much. And I think that's because Lamont Roach at some point in this fight hit him with a big shot that made him back up and made him scared. But it was also the missing, the decommitments from Lamont Roach, just decommitting at the right time, just making Pitbull miss over and over again. He was incredibly adept at making Pitbull miss, and if you could score points for making another guy miss, then Lamont Roach would very clearly have won this fight. But unfortunately, you score points for hitting the other guy, and Cruz is moving forward and delivering shots to the body, and he was the guy moving forward more, obviously. But the entire fight was fought at the pace and at the flow that Lamont Roach wanted, and he wasn't rewarded for that by the judges. I personally had the fight 115, 112 Roach. There were a couple point deductions. Somebody had the fight 115, 111 for Cruz, which is atrocious. But it's also a different number of points than I had, so I probably did something wrong. But nonetheless, maybe I would have had Roach 115, 111, Roach 114, 112 maybe, but I would have had Roach winning the fight. And I think it's not a blatant robbery, because I understand a draw in the sense that it's funny how each guy had so much offense, but it didn't really feel like either guy did enough. So in that sense, I think a draw is fair, right? Boxing is actually a very complex sport. People say boxing's simple. It's just throwing fists at each other. It is. It is just two guys standing in front of each other and throwing fists at each other. But boxing is a much more complicated sport when you get into the context and subtext of a fight like this one, where there's so many nuances and so many complexities and so many little things going on that aren't really appreciated by people. But I don't see a single way that Pitbull won this fight. I don't know how you possibly could have had Pitbull by 4 rounds. That's crazy to me. How Pitbull won this fight? That's a little mystifying. I think that I could criticize Lamont Roach for not throwing enough. I think there's going to be people who are frustrated with that because when he threw, it was effective. So that's the plan. You don't want him throwing more. Um, but you can't give a guy credit, at least when you're scoring, for I mean, you can, but as a secondary factor for using the ring, for determining where the fight takes place, which Lamont Roach was doing, and for slipping punches. Those are all incredibly important things. But the judges clearly weren't giving him credit for that. And it's a Texas card, and Pitbull Cruz is a hometown fighter. It is what it is. It's happened repeatedly in boxing history. Paulie Malignaggi famously said on the mic after he was robbed after a fight that Texas doesn't give a fair shake to uh, fighters who come from out of state to fight hometown fighters, and that rung true once again here. Lamont Roach definitely deserves at least a win from these last two fights. He's got to feel very hard done by. Although I don't know how many fighters have done their career more of a service from 2 draws, because I'm going to be honest, Lamont Roach is the kind of fighter stylistically where if his story was unfolding differently than this, where he's getting robbed over and over again, or not even robbed, but just he's fights he's won and the judges just won't give them to him. If that wasn't his story, I don't know if his style would actually resonate with people. It's kind of funny that it feels to me like the general boxing fandom is siding with Roach in this fight when in the arena clearly it feels like Pitbull is the more popular fighter, and you'd figure Pitbull would be the more popular fighter in the boxing fandom because he's the forward moving aggressive pressure fighter. But I think Lamont Roach has a bit bigger of a fandom. Maybe it's just because I'm from the United States, but Lamont Roach has definitely developed a following since that Tank fight, of course, that followed him into this fight and that favored him very strongly in this fight and that were very clearly rooting for him in this fight. And that's a great thing to see, and it's an interesting thing to see. Because I don't know if Lamont Roach was just out here beating people, especially if, like, imagine if he was undefeated with the style that he fights. People would hate him. People would hate him. But the fact is, I think that he doesn't really have that much volume. He's not, Floyd Mayweather in there with the head movement. He's not, like, insane Matrix-level head movement, even if he's great at slipping punches, even elite. But he doesn't have that level of defensive acumen, I think, to stay undefeated. He's more of a ring IQ guy. He's more of a rangefinder. He's more of a counterpuncher. He's definitely an excellent example of the American style of boxing once again. And speaking of the American style of boxing, I was very underwhelmed by Stephen Fulton's effort against O'Shaquie Foster. I should have been able to tell that my prediction of Stephen Fulton winning this fight, I said Stephen Fulton could even win this fight by a wide margin, which the exact opposite thing happened. I should have been able to tell from the fact that he missed weight that it wasn't going to go well. And he missed weight and he was slow. Stephen Fulton, he was slow. It was a very puzzling attempt to outbox O'Shaquie Foster. It makes no sense. Stephen Fulton had to get inside, bob and weave, even use his head movement, and stay inside and keep those straights from O'Shaquie Foster short. And instead, O'Shaquie Foster kept Stephen Fulton at range and just popped him all night with the jabs and with the straights and with the crosses, and it was nasty. This was definitely a fight that was determined by O'Shaquie Foster in basically all facets because Stephen Fulton was just getting run ragged out there. He didn't have the energy to get inside, and O'Shaquie Foster is too accurate of a puncher, and it makes sense that the guys who have beat O'Shaquie Foster are the guys who were more fearless, more willing to come forward, and whose head movement, I believe that Stephen Fulton has good enough head movement to dodge O'Shaquie Foster's punches still. That's why I picked him in the fight. But Stephen Fulton obviously had weight issues in this fight, and his speed was affected, so he couldn't really get inside, and then by the time he's tired, he doesn't have the energy to get inside, and he's just getting his ass kicked. So it wasn't really a very interesting fight at the end of the day like I thought that it could be, because Stephen Fulton's inside fighting could never really get established, and from there, the fight is just a non-starter, and it's O'Shaquie Foster is going to run across the finish line by 10 lengths. So that's what I think about those fights. I'm not necessarily disappointed in Pitbull Cruz. I think Lamont Roach did an excellent job. He had a really great, succinct strategy that he followed throughout the fight to let Pitbull Cruz lead, download information, and then, play him in, even if he has to establish the clinch and get to outboxing, get to cycling, get on the bike, and jab him to bits. And Pitbull did a lot. He threw a lot. I wouldn't be surprised if he threw more punches in the fight. I could criticize Roach for underthrowing, but I still don't think a draw is fair. I think Lamont Roach won this fight by a round or two or even more. So I'm disappointed in that decision. It's another disappointing decision for Texas judges, and it's going to be curious to see how Lamont Roach approaches getting a win, or if he continues to he's a champion, so you would expect him to continue to face the elite of the division. But that's all for me for now. Like and subscribe. Stay tuned for more boxing and combat sports content. But we'll continue to have coverage for every fight moving forward, so don't worry about it, you guys. Just stay tuned, like and subscribe, and peace out.